On Monday, President George Bush traveled to New York City to take part in the opening of the 47th session of the United Nations General Assembly. He talked about the role of the UN in this post-Cold War era, and he pledged assistance to the UN's peacekeeping and humanitarian efforts. The president was accompanied to New York by Acting Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft, and Edward Perkins, the U.S. delegate to the United Nations.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations the President of the United States of America, His Excellency Mr. George Bush.
47 years ago, I was a young man of 21, and like thousands of others of my generation, I'd gone off to war to help keep freedom alive. But 47 years ago this month, the war was finally over, and I was looking forward to peace and the chance to begin my life in earnest. 1945. It marked a moment of promise, not just for me, but for all of mankind. A great struggle against dictatorship had been fought and won. Across the globe, we all look forward to a future free of war, a world where we might raise our children in peace and freedom. And this institution, the United Nations, born amidst the ashes of war, embodied those hopes and dreams like no other. But the hopes and dreams of 1945 remained unfulfilled. Communist imperialism divided the world in two. Our hopes for peace and our dreams of freedom were frozen in the grip of Cold War. And instead of finding a common ground, we found ourselves at ground zero. And instead of living on Churchill's broad, sunlit uplands, millions found that there was, as Arthur Koestler so chillingly wrote, darkness at noon. And instead of uniting the nations, this body became a forum for distrust and division among nations. And in a cruel irony, the United Nations, created to free the world of conflict, became itself conflict's captive. And now, 47 years later, we stand at the end of another war, the Cold War, and our hopes and dreams have awakened again. Driven by its own internal contradictions and banished by the people's undying thirst for freedom, imperial communism has collapsed in its birthplace, and today Russia has awakened, democratic, independent, and free. This is the first General Assembly to seat you as truly independent and free nations. And to you and the leaders of the other independent states, I say welcome home. We are now truly United Nations. With the Cold War's end, I believe we have a unique opportunity to go beyond artificial divisions of a first, second, and third world to forge instead a genuine global community of free and sovereign nations, a community built on respect for principle of peaceful settlements of disputes, fundamental human rights, and the twin pillars of freedom, democracy, and free markets. Already, the United Nations, especially the Security Council, has done much to fulfill its original mission and to build this global community. UN leadership has been critical in resolving conflicts and brokering peace the entire world over. But securing democracy and securing the peace in the century ahead will be no simple task. Imperial communism may have been vanquished, but that does not end the challenges of our age, challenges that must be overcome if we are finally to end the divisions between East and West, North and South, that fuel strife and strain and conflict and war. As we support the historic growth of democracy around the world, I believe the community of nations and the United Nations face three critical, interrelated challenges as we enter the 21st century. First, we face the political challenge of keeping today's peace and preventing tomorrow's wars. As we see daily in Bosnia and Somalia and Cambodia, everywhere conflict claims innocent lives, the need for enhanced peacekeeping capabilities has never been greater. The conflicts we must deal with more intractable, the costs of conflict higher. And second, we face the strategic challenge of the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, truly the fastest growing security challenge to international peace and order. And third, we face the common economic challenge of promoting prosperity for all, of strengthening an open, growth-oriented, free market international economic order while safeguarding the environment. Meeting these challenges will require us to strengthen our collective engagement. It will require us to transform our collective institutions. And above all, it will require that each of us look seriously at our own governments and how we conduct our international affairs. We too must change our institutions and our practices if we are to make a new world of the promise of today, if we're to secure a 21st century peace. We face the common economic challenge of promoting prosperity for all, of strengthening an open, growth-oriented, free market international economic order while safeguarding the environment. Meeting these challenges will require us to strengthen our collective engagement. It will require us to transform our collective institutions. And above all, it will require that each of us look seriously at our own governments and how we conduct our international affairs. We too must change our institutions and our practices if we are to make a new world of the promise of today, if we're to secure a 21st century peace. With you today, I would like to discuss these three challenges: peacekeeping, proliferation, and prosperity. And I'd like to use this opportunity to begin to sketch how I believe the international community can work together to meet these three challenges, and how the United States is changing its institutions and policies to catalyze this effort. Let me begin with peacekeeping. The United Nations has a long and distinguished history of peacekeeping and humanitarian relief. From Cyprus and Lebanon to Cambodia and Croatia, the blue beret has become a symbol of hope amid all that hostility. And the UN has long played a central role in preventing conflicts from turning into wars, and strengthened peacekeeping capabilities can help buttress these diplomatic efforts. But as much as the United Nations has done, it can do much more. Peacekeepers are stretched to the limit while demands for their services increase by the day. The need for monitoring and preventive peacekeeping, putting people on the ground before the fighting starts, may become especially critical in volatile regions. This is especially the case because of the rapid and turbulent change that continues to shake Eastern Europe and Eurasia. Across the lands that once were imprisoned behind an iron curtain, peoples are reasserting their historical identities that were frozen in communism's catacomb. Where this is taking place in a democratic manner with tolerance and civility and respect for fundamental human rights and freedoms, this new democratic nationalism is all to the good. But unfortunately, we need only look to the bloody battles raging in places such as the former Yugoslavia to see the dangers of ethnic violence. This is the greatest threat to the democratic peace we hope to build with Eastern Europe, with Russia and Eurasia, even more so than economic deprivation. We fully support the efforts of NATO and CSCE and WEU the CIS and other competent regional organizations to develop peacekeeping capabilities. We are convinced that enhanced UN capabilities, however, are a necessary complement to these regional efforts, not just in Europe and Eurasia, but across the globe. I welcome the Secretary General's call for a new agenda to strengthen the United Nations' ability to prevent, contain, and resolve conflict across the globe. And today, I call upon all members to join me in taking bold steps to advance that agenda. I therefore will be discussing with my colleagues the merits of a special meeting of the UN Security Council to discuss the Secretary General's proposals and to develop concrete responses in 5 key areas. 1, robust peacekeeping requires men and equipment that only member states can provide. Nations should develop and train military units for possible peacekeeping operations and humanitarian relief, and these forces must be available on short notice at the request of the Security Council and with the approval, of course, of the governments providing them. 2, if multinational units are to work together, they must train together. Many nations, for example, Fiji, Norway, Canada, and Finland, have a long history of peacekeeping. And we can all tap into that experience as we train for expanded operations. Effective multinational action will also require coordinated command and control and interoperability of both equipment and communications. Multinational planning, training, field exercises will be needed. These efforts should link up with regional organizations. And 3, we also need to provide adequate logistical support for peacekeeping and humanitarian operations. Member states should designate stockpiles of resources necessary to meet humanitarian emergencies, including famines, floods, civil disturbances, and this will save valuable time in a crisis. And 4, we will need to develop planning, crisis management, and intelligence capabilities for peacekeeping and humanitarian operations. And 5, we must ensure adequate, equitable financing for UN and associated peacekeeping efforts. As I said, we must change our national institutions if we are to change our international relations. So let me assure you, the United States is ready to do its part to strengthen world peace by strengthening international peacekeeping. For decades, the American military has served as a stabilizing presence around the globe. And I want to draw on our extensive experience in winning wars and keeping the peace to support UN peacekeeping. I've directed the United States Secretary of Defense to place a new emphasis on peacekeeping. Because of peacekeeping's growing importance as a mission for the United States military, we will emphasize training of combat, engineering, and logistical units for the full range of peacekeeping and humanitarian activities. And we will work with the United Nations to best employ our considerable lift, logistics, communications, and intelligence capabilities to support peacekeeping operations. and we will offer our capabilities for joint simulations and exercises to strengthen our ability to undertake joint peacekeeping operations. There is room for all countries, large and small, and I hope all will play a part. Member states, as always, must retain the final decision on the use of their troops, of course. But we must develop our ability to coordinate peacekeeping efforts so that we can mobilize quickly when a threat to peace arises or when people in need look to the world for help. I have further directed the establishment of a permanent peacekeeping curriculum in U.S. military schools. Training, plainly, is key. The United States is prepared to make available our bases and facilities for multinational training and field exercises. One such base nearby with facilities is Fort Dix. America used these bases to win the Cold War. And today, with that war over, they can help build a lasting peace. The United States is willing to provide our military expertise to the United Nations to help the UN strengthen its planning and operations for peacekeeping. And we will also broaden American support for monitoring, verification, reconnaissance, and other requirements of UN peacekeeping or humanitarian assistance operations. And finally, the United States will review how we fund peacekeeping and explore new ways to ensure adequate American financial support for UN peacekeeping and UN humanitarian activities. I do believe that we must think differently about how we ensure and pay for our security in this new era. While the end of the Cold War may have ended, the superpower nuclear arms competition, regional competition, weapons of mass destruction continue. Over 20 countries have or are developing nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons and the means to deliver them. At a time when the United States and its former adversaries are engaged in deep historic cuts in our nuclear arsenals, our children and grandchildren will never forgive us if we allow new and unstable nuclear standoffs to develop around the world. We believe the Security Council should become a key forum for non-proliferation enforcement. The Security Council should make clear its intention to stem proliferation and sanction proliferators. Reaffirming assurances made at the time the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was negotiated, I propose that the Security Council reassure the non-nuclear states that it will seek immediate action to provide assistance in accordance with the Charter to any non-nuclear weapon state party to the NPT that is a victim of an act of aggression or an object of threat of aggression involving nuclear weapons. And I also call for the indefinite renewal of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty when it is reviewed in 1995. I believe we must explore ways that we can strengthen linkages between the suppliers clubs, the Nuclear Suppliers Group, Australia Group, and the Missile Technology Control Regime, and specialized UN agencies. Here I would like to note UNSCOM's productive efforts to dismantle the Iraqi weapons of mass destruction program and the International Atomic Energy Agency's continuing good work. But as the UN organizations adapt to stop proliferation, so too must every member state change its structures to advance our non-proliferation goals. In that spirit, I want to announce my intention today to work with the United States Congress to redirect The United States Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, ACTA, known to some of you as ACTA, to refocus its talents on providing technical support for non-proliferation, weapons monitoring and destruction, and global defense conversion. Under the direction of the Secretary of State, ACTA should be used not only in completing the traditional arms control agenda, but just as importantly, in providing technical assistance on our new security agenda. Even as we work to prevent proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, we must be realistic and guard ourselves against proliferation that has already taken place. And therefore, we're working toward a cooperative system for defense against limited ballistic missile attacks. And we fully intend to have other nations participate in this global protection system. And while expanded peacekeeping capabilities and improved non-proliferation efforts will be critical for building and enduring peace, shared economic growth is the long-term foundation for a brighter future well into the next century. And that's why I stated yesterday during a moment of international uncertainty that the United States would be strongly engaged with its global partners in building a global economic, financial, and trading structure for this new era. At the same time, I urge that our global responsibilities lead us to examine ways to strengthen the G7 coordination process. And I affirmed America's support for European integration that opens markets and enhances Europe's capability to be our partner in the great challenges that we face in this new era. While the exact form of integration is, of course, for Europeans to determine, we will stand by them. Economic growth is not a zero-sum process. All of us will benefit from the expanded trade and investment that comes from a vibrant, growing world economy. And to ensure that the benefits of this growth are sustained and shared by all, fair and open competition should be the fuel for the global economic engine. And that's why the United States wants to complete the Uruguay round of the GATT negotiations as soon as possible and to create a network of free trade agreements beginning with the North American Free Trade Agreement. At the same time, we need to recognize that we have a shared responsibility to foster and support the free market reforms necessary to build growing economies and vibrant democracies in the developing world and in the new democratic states. This should be done by promoting the private sector to build these new economies, not by fostering dependency with traditional government-to-government foreign aid. Since World War II, foreign assistance often served as a weapon in the Cold War. Obviously, we will still use critical foreign assistance funds to meet legitimate security needs. And as our humanitarian operations in Somalia and northern Iraq, Bosnia, and the former Soviet Union will testify, we will continue our robust humanitarian assistance efforts to help those suffering from man-made and natural disasters. But foreign aid, as we've known it, needs to be transformed. The notion of the handout to less developed countries needs to give way to cooperation in mutually productive economic relationships. We know that the more a nation relies on the private sector and free markets, the higher its rate of growth. The more open to trade, the higher its rate of growth. And the better a country's investment climate, the higher its rate of growth. To move from what I would call aid dependency, to economic partnership, we propose to alter fundamentally the focus of U.S. assistance programs to building strong, independent economies that can become contributors to a healthy, growing global economy. Now, that means that our new emphasis should be on building economic partnerships among our private sectors that will promote prosperity at home and abroad also. And working with our Congress, I will propose a top-to-bottom overhaul of our institutions that plan and administer foreign assistance, drastically reducing the bureaucracy that is built up around government-based programs, streamlining our delivery systems, and strengthening support for private sector development and economic reform. The Agency for International Development, AID, another institution born during the Cold War, needs to be fundamentally and radically overhauled. Promoting economic security, opportunity, and competitiveness will become a primary mission of the State Department.